Hello again. It's my great joy now. You've all worked so very, very hard. We've been listening to each other. We've been debating with each other. It's been a marvelous week, but we deserve a treat. We reserve a reward, and your reward comes now. We're now to have a keynote talk by Professor Jim Al-Khalili, CBE, who is a quantum physicist who holds a University of Surrey Distinguished Chair in Theoretical Physics, as well as a personal chair in physics and a university chair in the public engagement in science. And with his three chairs, with his trio of chairs, as it were, he is, as he puts it wonderfully on his website, a living three-piece suite. That's British humor, the living three-piece suite that is the three-chair Jim Al-Khalili. While he is an eminent scientist and indeed a fellow of the Royal Society, he is also an influential and much loved public scientist or science communicator. He's published 14 books on popular science and the history of science. Between them, they've been translated into 26 different languages, and he's presented many TV and radio programs, most notably, perhaps, my personal absolute favorite is The Life Scientific, a radio program which has been running for just over 10 years, in which he converses with leading scientists about their life and work. And this program, I am sure, has done more than any other initiative to change public conceptions of science and its importance for today and the future. So we're very lucky to have Jim with us, who is going to give us some personal reflections on Bilad al-Sham. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you very much, Michael. Well, lovely introduction. Good evening, everyone. Masa al-khair. It's a real honor and a privilege to be able to give this final keynote talk after 5 days of symposium talks covering so many different issues. So, of course, it's quite a responsibility for me too. Therefore, I'm not going to try and summarize the week or offer some fresh new insights. I'm not in a position to offer expert advice on policy or practice. Of course, over the course of the week, you've heard from many people, many speakers who've highlighted the plight of Syrian academics and the Syrian higher education sector. They've covered social issues, ideological and political challenges, issues like gender and disability, but of course, most importantly, how to move forward and rebuild a society and a national infrastructure and indeed a higher education sector after a decade of terrible conflict. Well, you can see from my opening slide, I've decided to refer to Syria as Bilad al-Sham, which of course is the classical Arabic name for Syria. I guess historically it would have included Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, that whole area. Bilad al-Sham translated into English means the nation to the left, al-Sham, the left, because if you're in Arabia, Western Arabia, say Mecca, facing the rising sun, so facing the east, if you can try and imagine on the map, then if you're facing the east, to your left will be north, and that is al-Sham. To the right, al-Yamin in Arabic, is of course al-Yemen, which is down in the south. So it's Bilad al-Sham has always held some sort of poetic meaning to me as a wonderful name for Syria. I want to use these next few minutes then to give some personal perspectives on and hopefully maybe a message of hope, a note of optimism, maybe even inspiration if I do my job well, to many of those who are still struggling, whether as refugees trying to build new lives outside of Syria, or for those still within Syria working so hard to rebuild their nation. I think that's all we can hope from, I hope you'll agree, or we can hope for from a keynote speech to end such a wonderful week. The one thing I can share, of course, with my Syrian colleagues is a heritage. I was born in Baghdad in 1962. This is on the banks of the river Tigris. And I lived in Iraq. I'm English mother, Iraqi father, but I grew up, and my education until the age of 16 was in Iraq. And of course, Iraq and Syria, certainly back then in the 60s and 70s, shared many, and apart from a shared history and a shared culture, I think the way of life was very, very similar, whether Baghdad or Damascus. Certainly for the educated classes, I guess, life was relatively comfortable. We certainly didn't, any of us, have to struggle with so many sectarian challenges and issues that we see in the Middle East today. So my life growing up in Iraq, and in Baghdad in particular, was very pleasant. Here's a picture of me. I'm second from the left with my family around about 1970. My Iraqi father, English mother, my brother and sister. As far as I can remember, it was quite an idyllic childhood. But of course, the similarities between Iraq and Syria are more than just shared nationhood or shared culture or shared language and religion, but of course, a history. Certainly, when it comes to cultural heritage, there aren't many countries that can boast a history that goes back further than Syria. This is something that I examined in a BBC documentary 12 years ago now, in 2009, called Science and Islam, a 3-part documentary on the history of Arabic science. I also followed it up with a book a year later called Pathfinders, The Golden Age of Arabic Science. Of course, for the BBC documentary, I had the privilege of traveling around the Middle East. So I spent some time in Syria. I also went to Turkey, to Iran, North Africa, and it was a wonderful experience. Here's a well-known picture. This is a sort of the tourist picture postcard of Damascus at night, taken from Mount Qasyun, the mountain that overlooks Damascus. But I remember when filming with my BBC crew, spending an evening having a lovely meal in a restaurant on the edge of the mountain overlooking Damascus. So this was the scene I remember seeing and enjoying it so much. So I want to say something about the history of Syria, and in particular the history of some of the scholars of medieval times in that part of the world who changed our understanding of the world in a very profound way. As Michael mentioned in the introduction, I'm a scientist, I'm a physicist. And so I was very interested to read about, to study, to then talk about many of the great scholars of medieval Islam and their contribution. So I wanted in this short keynote to maybe just reflect on and remind people of some of those great scholars who were Syrian, came from Syria, or who flourished in Syria. The first one is a philosopher. Now, Al-Farabi is we believe of Turkish origin, but there's some debate as to whether he was Persian, how far east he originated, but certainly he flourished in Syria, in Aleppo. He flourished in the 10th century, so over 1,000 years ago. He was a polymath. That means, he covered many, many different subjects, from philosophy to mathematics, to ethics, to logic, musical theory. Importantly, he was one of the first to reconcile Greek philosophy with Islamic theology. And of course, He was a great influencer of later philosophers, such as Ibn Sina, Avicenna, or Ibn Rushd, Averroes, or Maimonides in North Africa. So great was Al-Farabi that he was known as the second teacher, the first teacher, of course, being Aristotle. My next scholar worked in astronomy. Now, astronomy in the medieval world, in particular in places like Syria, was tremendously vibrant and led to many advances way beyond the work of the astronomers of ancient Greece, such as Ptolemy. Of course, I should say that this was all before the invention of the telescope. So before Copernicus and Galileo and Newton and Kepler. It was also a time when the astronomers of the world believed that the Earth was the center of the cosmos. And so the sun orbits around the Earth. This is known as the geocentric model, which was developed by the ancient Greeks, and particularly the work of the Greek astronomer Ptolemy. So what did these Arabic and Islamic scholars and astronomers do to advance that work? Well, my first of the two astronomers I'm going to mention here is Albertani, a 9th century Syrian astronomer. He flourished in the city of Raqqa. He certainly wrote many texts and manuscripts on mathematics, and in particular on trigonometry. And he was one of the greatest observational astronomers of the medieval world. In fact, so great was Albertani's influence that I remember when I was filming my Science and Islam series, and I'd reached that part of the story when I wanted to see how the astronomers in the Arabic-speaking world influenced the European Renaissance and influenced astronomers like Copernicus. So we visited the university where Copernicus worked in Italy, and I was able to read through his book, De Revolutionibus. This is Copernicus's great work, in which he proposes, and it's later confirmed correct by Galileo, that in fact it's not the Earth, but the sun that is at the center of the then known cosmos. So the Earth is just another planet orbiting around the sun. A wonderful contribution Copernicus made. But looking through his book, I was surprised to see towards the end, page after page after page of charts of star coordinates, star charts known in Arabic as Zij, all produced by Albertani. So Albertani, apart from making so many measurements and observations and distances to the sun and the moon and the length of the day and so on, he also produced star charts that were useful for navigation and indeed were used by later astronomers in Europe like Copernicus. Now I want to tell you another brief story about another astronomer. Oh, okay, I was going to show you the slide of Copernicus, which I forgot to show. Okay, so this is Copernicus's model, Sol, sun in the center, and then the Mercury, Venus, Earth, and you can see here, this is Terra, this is the Earth, and the moon orbiting the Earth. So this is the correct, the only thing that orbits the Earth is the moon. The Earth itself orbits the sun like the other planets. This heliocentric model, of course, heralded the arrival of modern astronomy. But Copernicus used mathematics. He used a mathematical model that was more sophisticated than that used by the ancient Greeks. Did he develop that mathematical model all by himself? Actually, no. He used mathematics and techniques developed by others, in particular by another Syrian astronomer. Here, for those of you Syrians watching this, I don't need to tell you what that picture is. This is the picture of the Great Mosque, the Jami' al-Umayyad, the Umayyad Mosque in the middle of Damascus. Wonderful, wonderful structure. In fact, inside, famously, the The marble floors are so shiny, they look like ice. It looks like you could slip up very easily on them. It's a beautifully preserved mosque. But I'm showing you this picture for a good reason, because this minaret here, I'm going to circle a little ledge, a window ledge here. We climbed up this minaret because we were looking for something very special. Here's a photo that I took from here, looking across at the other side of the courtyard, looking across at the other end, the other side of the mosque. What's important is this sundial. This is a sundial that was built by another medieval astronomer by the name of Ibn Shatar, a 14th century astronomer. He worked as the timekeeper of the mosque, the muwaqqit, the person who tells the muezzin when to call the people to prayer, because he understands about the motion, the earth around the sun. He understands about the phases of the moon. So he was the astronomer in service of what is so important to Muslims. But more than that, he also developed the mathematics, many of the mathematical techniques which simplified the Greek model of the universe, the Greek geocentric model, with circles orbiting around other circles. It became all very complicated. He produced some very beautiful mathematics that, of course, was used by Copernicus. And so these astronomers, many in the West don't know them. They've never heard their names. And yet you dig into the history and you realize their contribution to science, to the continuation of our scientific knowledge from the ancient Greeks through to the modern day, has this chapter by these great scholars who made advances during medieval times. My final scholar, of course, I have to mention Ibn Nefis. He was a great anatomist of the 13th century from Damascus. Again, covered many, many different areas of science, but most famously, he was the first person to really describe quite accurately the human digestive system and the system of blood circulation, pulmonary and coronary blood circulation, 4 centuries before William Harvey. In Europe, in particular here in the UK, it's very often a popular quiz question. Who discovered blood circulation? And the answer is always William Harvey. And I like to remind people, if it comes up, that actually there was a Syrian scholar who explained this 400 years before Harvey. I want to end here. I'm hoping to end on a note of optimism. Of course, it's very easy to show some of these images that many of us are so familiar with of devastation. Of course, this is the city of Homs, where we see the destruction that's happened to so many cities in this wonderful country. I prefer to think of happier times, not because of nostalgia, but really to remind the world of a Syria before or so many of these problems. So I just wanted to share with you 3 photographs that I have of my memories of traveling around Syria in 2009. This is standing in front of Crac de Chevalier, famous fort, just north of the border with Lebanon, so halfway between Damascus and Aleppo. Here I am again, same clothes, you will notice, because I was making a TV documentary and you have to wear the same clothes. But this is, of course, outside Palmyra, the ruins of the ancient city of Palmyra in the desert. And my favorite of all was when I visited my cousin in Damascus. This is her son. She's Iraqi. They escaped Iraq in the 80s to escape Saddam's regime, settled in Damascus, in Syria, and then, of course, had to escape Syria back to Iraq again when the trouble started there. So they are refugees twice over. Thankfully, they're rebuilding their lives back in Baghdad now. So I don't know if, I can go any way towards reawakening people's pride of some of these remarkable stories from Syrian history. Certainly Syrians themselves, I would like to think, know about Al-Farabi, Albertani, Ibn Shatir, Ibn Nefis. Maybe I can just remind the rest of the world that today's Syrian academics follow a tradition of scholarship and enlightenment that stretches back hundreds, indeed thousands of years. That's as good a reason as any for us to wish to preserve and rebuild that country. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Jim. That was a terrific talk, a very moving one, and one which I did actually find very, very uplifting, and I learned a lot. I'm sure I'm not alone I did know about Al-Farabi, but not much about the others, and I shall now forevermore know that William Harvey did not get there first. It was a wonderful statement, I think, about the importance of history, and how, in a way, the past, the present, and the future are inextricably bound up together, and that we need to look back to the past, not only to the mistakes that were made, to the conflicts, the wars, and so on, but to the great breakthroughs and to the great breakthroughs of in science and in philosophy and thinking and in culture that happened throughout the Islamic world, which are often not nearly well enough known in the West. So a message of hope, as you suggested it might be at the time, and the most wonderful way to end what we've done here today. So thank you so much for that. And can we all please just give Jim a virtual round of applause? We're applauding you in our minds and our hearts, but silently.
Thank you, everyone.
And now I'd just like to say a few other words of thanks to close formally, as it were, this symposium. We've had 5 marvelous days of penetrating and wide-ranging presentations, discussions, debates, and also let's not forget the 2 cultural events, the Forsama film and the Syrian Humming Project, which demonstrated, I think, marvelously how art can offer highly original insights which complement the work of scientists. And we need reminding from time to time, perhaps, that the goal of both art and science is always to improve the human condition and human well-being. So first of all, thank you above all to all of you, our Syrian academics, for sharing your research findings and recommendations for us, for demonstrating that your unique insights and perspectives are important for us, not only for Syria, but for research globally, and for our shared attempts to meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. You remember that throughout the symposium, we've been keeping an eye on some of the UN's SDGs. We owe you all a great debt. I'd also like to thank our keynote speakers, of whom the triumphant last one, of course, is still with us, Jim, and to thank all of the UK academics who have participated in the symposium and enriched our understanding of what can and should be done in the future as we work with our Syrian colleagues and increasingly now with Syrian universities. I'd just like to echo thanks given at the beginning to the Royal Society and to the British Academy for their enthusiastic and effective support of this symposium. And it has been truly marvellous to have many fellows from both of these national academies participating in our discussions and debates. I'd like to pay a special tribute to the WorldSpan team for making the technological dimension of the symposium work so efficiently, so smoothly, and for all of us so painlessly. So thank you so much. And throughout the symposium, our exchanges have been made fully possible because of the expertise of our interpreters, to whom we owe a heartfelt debt. So thank you all very much. Knowing that everything was being passed over to those who wanted to hear it in another language was very important to the success of this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So now we need to look forward. We need to work further in the future on the many recommendations on how we can maintain, strengthen, and innovate in our collaborations with our Syrian colleagues, and how we can best create and sustain new partnerships which will strengthen HE in Syria. We have much to think about, but we in the UK have much also to celebrate. Finally, I must thank Kate Robertson and her Syria Programme team. Without them, this wouldn't have happened. Kate Robertson, the extraordinary Kate Robertson, is the founder and the director of the Syria Programme. So for the past several years, the person who has brought all of our Syrians into the contact with HE and international higher education. She also is the creator and organizer of this symposium, yet another major achievement. Kate often says she's a backroom person, but we cannot leave her in the backroom. I can't see any of you. You're out there somewhere, but wherever you are, whatever you're doing, please now, can you give a very rousing round of applause to the extraordinary Kate Robertson for everything she has done. And then after that, please, in the silence or the noise of your current locations, please pay another round of applause to everyone, yourselves included, for being part of this historic symposium. Thank you all, good night, and peace be upon you.